Hey everyone, I'm Doug Appleton. I'm the creative director at Perception, and today I wanted to talk a little bit about workflow and a few simple tricks I find myself using all the time to speed up my design process. But first, for those who aren't familiar with Perception, we're a motion graphics and visual effects studio that lives in this unique space, conceptualizing and building futuristic worlds for film and television, as well as working with some of the world's largest technology and automotive companies. We also work in the more traditional motion graphics world, designing title sequences for some of the biggest films in the world. Most recently, we worked on Shang-Chi, Loki, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, WandaVision, and some other really exciting things that are yet to be released, but hopefully we can talk about pretty soon. Anyway, figured we could make a cool looking hologram thing, try and make it look unique. I hope. I think so. We'll find out. So let's start by pulling in a model. The model I'm going to use, you can find in the content browser. It's this advanced face rig. You just search for it in your content browser and open this guy up. So you can see here I've already posed this guy in this super cool duck face pose. I also created a little projector thing. Let's assume his hologram is going to be, I don't know, some sort of selfie. The other thing I did was convert the textures to Redshift materials, which is super easy. So if we select this eye right here, go to Redshift, Materials, Tools, Convert Materials, and we'll just wait. And there we go. We have a Redshift material here. My bump is attached. My diffuse is attached. You'll see they don't look exactly the same. You have to do some tweaking, and maybe some more complicated Cinema 4D materials might not come over exactly the same. But it's a great way to get a good base that you can then tweak from there. So I think we'll just start from the top. The first thing you want to do is only clear from certain angles, right? Which means that if the light is projecting from here, we'll only see, sort of this part of the face. And we'll cheat it a little bit because we still want it to be recognizable, but we only see it from that part of the face. We could probably make a really cool shader that could do that. But then what we end up with is when we get into comp, if we want to adjust and tweak that, we got to go back to our render. So I want to build a shader that I can adjust in comp. So let's start with creating a new Redshift material. Right, simple material here. And I'm going to apply this to our head. But if I do this, right, if I just apply this onto the head here and I render this, right, still has all of his materials underneath, which doesn't really work for us. So this is where takes comes in, and one of the things that I love about takes. So let's talk about that. We go into our takes tab, and just for ease of use right now, I'll just dock that down here. You can see our takes are set up like this. So this is a new take, does what you think it does, makes a new take. This is an override group. We'll talk about that in a second. This is auto take, which again, if you do this and then you start moving your model around, it won't do anything yet, because what you need to also activate is this guy here, which is lock overrides. And so what this will allow us to do is to grab our head mesh here, and you'll see all this stuff is turned blue, which means I can now move that. And that is now, since auto take is on, made an auto take. You'll also see our objects in here now have coordinates as takes. And if I went back to my main take, back in the middle. This part here is, I think, a thing that confuses a lot of people, because there's a chance that you leave something on and you start moving stuff around, and then you go back into a take that you want to render something from, and then everything's all moved around and all messed up, and it just kind of becomes, I think, a little cumbersome. So there is a little bit of workflow thought process that you have to think about. And the way I like to do it is, actually, let me just undo all the stuff that I just did. And just to make it easier, we can just delete this take. The way I like to do it is always keep those off and only turn them on when there's something specific that you want to do. That way, let me turn these on, move my thing around, great, turn them off. And it just becomes another sort of second nature thing, like saving all the time, right? It's something that you want to just continuously do and become aware of. The other thing to note about takes is, let's say I have my other take, right? I'm working in this, and I want to adjust a material, but I don't want to adjust it just for this take. I want to adjust it on everything, but on this take, let's say I have different lighting on it or something. You can still do that. So if we open up this material, if these are off, any adjustment I make on this take, for instance, it's blue. If I go to my main take, you'll see it's still blue. But if I want that to only be for this take, I turn on auto take and turn on my overrides. And now if I want to make that red, well, now it's red on this take and blue on this take. So again, it's just being mindful of these things. It can get very confusing and it can get very messy, especially if you're sharing projects with some people who aren't used to using takes. They don't even know to open up the this tab to see all your takes. Things can get kind of confusing, but that's why I want to talk about it, because I love takes and I want more people to use takes. What we're going to be talking about today is override groups. So let me just go back again and undo kind of all of this stuff that I had done. Right, I just want it to be clean. So let's make a new take, and I'm going to call this one, let's call it extras, because I'm going to do a few fun things with this material. So like we said before, if I go into my head and I just throw my material on there, it's on there, it's on the main take, it's on extras, but nothing's actually showing. So I just want it to be on this extras take and override everything. And that's where an override group comes into play. So let's turn an override group. We have objects, new group right here. I'm going to call this new group head, and there's nothing in here right now. So what you want to do is takes becomes kind of an additive process, right? So if I want to affect the head, I have to pull the head in there. So if I middle click on this group, that selects everything in that group, and I can just drag it into head, but you'll see that's not going to work because I don't have any overrides set up. So if I turn that on, now I can go in here and just drag that into head, and you'll see everything in head. And then you have this group tag. And what this lets you do is add a override to an entire group of something. And so what I want will be material. And now you'll see all my materials have this take override on them. So let's just drag our material over here. Oh, let's turn that on. Let's just drag our material over here. And you'll see now he's blue. And if I go here, now he's got these other materials, which is great. So how does this help us make what we're trying to make? So there's a material that I love to make. And if you had watched the WandaVision stuff we talked about earlier on in the year, there's some similar things going on with splitting up channels and things like that. So what I want to do is give myself essentially a mask that I can use in comp to mask out just the face of this guy, or just the parts that I want. What I want to do is essentially project a black and white gradient down on top of this guy, and that way in comp I can use that to cut out parts of his face. So I just turned this off, right? Because when this is on, I can't override anything. And when that's off, now anything I do on this works on all layers. So we want basically just a ramp, right? So let's open up a ramp. And actually what I want is not a material, I want an incandescent material. Because I don't want any lighting, I don't want reflections, highlights, anything like that. I just want the pure color. So we can delete that, make this an incandescent, and now we've got that. So let's take this ramp color, we'll plug it into color, and that gives us, if we look at this, and apologies, I don't have as much screen real estate as I would like. that gives us this guy. So what this is doing here is this is actually based on the UVs. And that's all well and good. You'll see the eyelashes pop out. But if you look at this, we have a gradient from the chin up to the head, and then a gradient from the neck up to the chin. And that's not going to get us what we need. What we want is really kind of a front to back gradient. So what we need to do is use a camera projection. Normally, you'd think, let's just do a camera map, pull that in there, that guy, but we can't plug that into the image, right? So how do we get a ramp to go into our camera map? And the way we do this is by using C4D shader. Now we've got this guy, and on this shader, we can put in our gradient, and we plug that in there, text 0. Now we've got a gradient into the camera map, and then that into our color. And now this is working a little better, right? It's projected on there. It's going from left to right, but that's because we're not projecting from any particular camera yet. So let's make a camera. We'll kind of close this stuff, and you can see, what's happening here. We go create camera. We've got this lovely camera. Let's look in it. And I want to just zero this whole thing out. All right, so my camera is down here. Then let's just rotate it up like that. And kind of look down on the head. Actually, I'm going to rotate it around. So the top of this camera to be white and the back to be black. I know I can adjust the gradient, but just sort of visually seeing it like this, I find to be helpful. So that's our camera there. We can go back into our material, right? Our camera picker, just grab that, put it in there. We'll name you Top Cam. Let's do that. Now if we go back to this, so we get everything inside the cone of the camera, right? And then we want to adjust our gradient. So if we look at it right now, our gradient is not really going front to back. Let's open this up. I'll just shrink that. C4D shader. Our gradient, right? Our gradient right now is 2D-U. There's a 2D-V. What does that do? There we go. Right, white at the nose, black at the back of the head, and we can kind of tweak this all we want. Right, that's going to get more white. That's going to get more black in the back of the head. And one thing that helps in a situation like this, where what we want is white at the tip and black at the back, is if you hit Control, you can hover over here and you can see what your white value is. So my nose is at 0.99, pretty close to pure white, and the back of the head is 0.2. So we can actually pull that up a little bit. And we don't want pure white or pure black, because if we do, that ends up clipping the value. So if this was all 1 all the way up to here, then we can't in comp adjust those levels to bring back some of that information because it's all clipped at 1. Same thing with the back. If that is at 0 at the back, for instance, if it was all the way like this, this becomes 0. There's no information here. There's nothing we can do, no matter how we render this. There's no information we can grab from that. And hitting Control on here just helps find that that line. So we can go back to this a little bit, right? So just kind of dark back there, and now we're at 0.06, so we have the information there. So what this does now is we have our front and our back, but this doesn't quite get us exactly what we're looking for, which is to have it from the perspective of whatever our little projector thing is. In this case, it's this guy that I had made that animates around like that. So how do we do that? Well, the simple thing there is we go to our camera, Let's go to our rigging tags. There you are. Constraint. Then on this constraint, we want a PSR, so that's a parent or a position scale rotation. Let's turn off everything right now, and we throw in our base. And then what we want for rotation is we don't want everything, so we don't want our camera to point at the thing. Let's do H and B, and you'll see our camera rotated around. And now what you'll see is this is kind of facing the way of that. And so we have dark here, light here, which is backwards. So it seems like our thing flipped. That's okay. We can just open up our gradient, right click, invert gradient. That looks weird, but that looks right? So it's white on that side and black on that side. And we'll watch it from here. If we hit play now, this gradient will slowly move around the head based on where that thing is pointing. We can use this as a Luma mat to cut out the parts of the face that we don't want to see. The other thing I want to do with this, because now we have the part facing the camera, let's do just a top to bottom gradient. You could do another take, make another material, do a top to bottom gradient, but then I think things start to get cumbersome. So one of the things I like to do is just do it all in one material. And then how do you do that? Well, the way I would like to do that is let's duplicate this. Right, we duplicate that guy. We have our gradient in there. We have our camera map. We want a different camera. So let me close this real quick. And we'll get rid of that because we don't need that. This is top cam. We'll call this one front cam. And let's zero all of this stuff out. There we go. We got our front camera. Take that. Let's just pull that back as well as lift that up a little bit. Right, so we kind of want it roughly here-ish, right? Because really we're just trying to get the model inside of the camera. We have that. So let's plug that into color just so we can test our gradient. All right, so zooming in, moving around. There we go. Our gradient, you'll see, is going left to right, so we don't want that. Let's open this up and let's call you U. And we'll flip these guys again. And actually, I do want V. I just had this the wrong way, right? So let's put that back to V. And here's the problem. Let's do that. All right, front cam. Okay, so back into my gradient, and we can just adjust this a little bit, make sure the bottom is a little bit black, the top is a little bit white. We'll go in here and we'll see kind of where we're at. So that's all clipped up in there. One, and down here it starts moving. So this guy goes all the way back up. That's good enough. So we've got this guy. Well, now, how do we put them both into one material? A node called Color Maker. And what we'll do here is a fun little trick that I've talked about in the past with some cinema materials, standard materials, but not with Redshift. But it's the same exact principle. So our, let's say, front to back gradient, let's plug into our red channel. And if we look at this, throw it into color, under this guy, well, now we have a red gradient. If we plug this into green, oops, get out of the red, we have a green gradient. If we plug this into everything, we are back at our normal gradient. So there's some cool things we can do with this. Let's take our top to bottom will be red. This, or the front to back will be red. The top to bottom one, let's make that green. So if we look at this, it sort of looks like a normals pass, but obviously it's not, because if we look at the red channel, we have our front to back gradient. If we look at our green channel, we have our top to bottom gradient. We could do a lot of fun stuff with this. So let's take a Fresnel, for instance, and we can throw that into the blue channel. And now if we look at our blue channel, well, now we've got our Fresnel. And just to drive home kind of how cool we can make this and the things we can do, let's delete our green, because we don't really need that. I think we can get away with just our one thing. And let's add a noise to this. And I'm going to use the Maxon noise and plug this into our green channel. And now when we look at this guy, right, it looks like this. You can kind of see the noise on there. And if we look at the green, well, now we've got our noise. And so I want, let's do Cell Voronoi. Yeah, let's do some Cell Voronoi noise. We'll bring our scale way down. Let's make it smaller than that. Yeah, and let's animate it. So now in this one material, we have three passes essentially. We have our red channel is our front to back, our green is this noise, and our blue will be this Fresnel. So let's work on making this thing colorful. Again, doing it in a way that gives us a lot of control in comp. While we're out here, I'm going to just put a protection tag on our cameras, and it's in rigging tags, protection tag there, and protection tag there. That just means we can't move our cameras around, so if anything should get knocked around, these will be fine. Let's make a new take. So we have our extras, and we'll name our material extras. And then this new take we'll call RGB lights, because to make this colorful, I want to use lights to do that. We'll show how we do that. So this scene came with lights. I don't want to use those lights because I like the way our beauty looks. I don't want to move things around for our RGB. We might want to adjust things a little bit. So for this, I'm just going to turn on my auto take and turn on the lock overrides, and you just turn these guys off. And now, if we were to render this, right, you'll see there's a little bit of a difference. Now it's just using default lighting instead of these nice lights we have back there. Right? So flat lighting, nicer lighting. We turn on the auto takes that, and so when we go into our main, our lights are back on. And here, our lights are off. So let's start making some RGB lights. This is going to be pretty simple. We can actually just duplicate these lights we have here. And let's duplicate those. We'll call these our RGB lights. And we'll go with R. And right now this is kind of arbitrary since we'll move these around. B, and let's turn those on. And now I'll turn that off because I want to change this stuff. I don't want it to be overrides, right? I want these RGB lights to be RGB lights wherever they are, but just make sure that they are, on for this, off for the other ones, but I don't want their values and things to change on all these different takes just in case I want to reuse them someplace else. So let's go into Yes, for R, let's make this fully red. For G, we'll make you fully green. And this time it's a lot easier to just go into here, into your RGB values, so you can make it pure green. And same thing with the blue. We can make it pure blue. And double check our R is pure red, but it should be. Great. Now, if we were to RGB lights, there we go, render this scene. Well, now we've got this guy. Let's it back out. So now we've got this thing going where these lights match the lighting of our previous scene, but we don't necessarily want that. But this is cool too, because if we look at our red lighting, we have that. Our green lighting is kind of the rim light there. Our blue is the fill from that side. Cool. And let's set up one or two more things. We'll just make two new takes. We'll call this head, so we just get a render of the head. And this one we'll call projector. And then in these, we'll turn those on. So in head, we'll turn the base thing off. In projector, we'll turn the head off. And now those two will be their own passes as well. So where we're at now, I think looks pretty good, but I still think it might be a little too simple. Not just for our render, but just for the sake of this presentation, it might be a little too simple. So let's try and do one more thing just to make it a little more complicated for no reason. So one of the things I want to do to this, and I'm going to close my preview. One of the things I want to do to this is what can we do to the model itself when this thing's projecting on it to make it really feel that it can't project that other side. And I think it would be cool if like the back side of this model kind of broke up, right? And then became solid where this is projecting. So essentially we want to break apart the back of the model. And there are a few ways to do that. But the thing I want to do is do it with a Voronoi fracture. So let's work on how we're going to break up the back of this guy's head. And I think just for simplicity's sake and just what we're looking at, let's reduce all this stuff. We'll turn off all those lights because all we need is this. So the way I want to break this up is using the Voronoi fracture object. I think we have a lot of, A, it looks cool, B, you have a lot of control in it. So I want to use that to break up the head. So let's pull it down there, put the head inside the Voronoi fracture, and you'll see immediately this is all broken up. Looks pretty cool. We got a cool fracture, something more interesting than like poly effects would break this up in all the quads, and that looks somewhat unnatural, right? So the Voronoi fracture, we have this cool Voronoi pattern to it. And if you've never used the Voronoi fracture before, just a really quick overview on it. All the power from the Voronoi fracture comes from here in sources. And this point generator here is generating points randomly on the surface of your object and then fracturing it based on that. And you'll see if we up the point amount, we have more points, we have more fracture. You can also play with the distribution type for normal, inverse normal. The other cool one is exponential. I like that one because you can change kind of how it distributes the points. You can see this is based on X, and you can flip that to negative X. So a lot of really cool stuff. We're just going to use uniform. And in sources, you don't have to just use the point generator. You can actually put anything you want in there. So if I had a cube, this is going to be kind of huge. And I put that cube in there, and let's make this a little bit smaller. Right, this is now an object that is influencing the fracture. And because I have a point generator in here as well, if I just delete that, you can see everything is based on this cube, right? And it's a little more organized because it's looking at the faces of the cube to fracture the object. So some really cool effects that you can do with that. Again, for us, we're just going to be using the point generator. So let me just undo all this and get my point generator back. There we go. And I'm going to set this up to something like, let's say 200. Right, because I want these fractures, maybe we'll go smaller than this, but for now, let's get everything working at this, and then we can increase that point amount in a little bit. So what we want to do is get this thing to break apart, not just on the back of the head, but really based on where this thing is pointing. And I think there's a really cool way we can kind of do that. So let's turn this off for right now. And what we're going to be using is a vertex map. I have one in here, but let's delete this one and just start with a clean one. And my first instinct was, oh, I'll just point a vertex map into the sources and that'll do it. But that doesn't actually work. So we have to kind of go around it a different way. So let's make our vertex map first. Let's click on the head and we can go into select, and then we want to be in our vertex mode. Select set vertex weight, values at 0, click OK, and now our vertex is set to 0. So it's all red, which means it's getting no weight applied to it. And what would be great, what I would love to do is have like a light or something project onto that to paint the vertex, but that doesn't work either. So you have to kind of go about it, again, a different way, a little more roundabout, but in a way that still works. If we click on the vertex and we click use fields, we can then add fields to this. And if we want to imitate a light, let's delete the freeze, because we don't need that. We can go into the field here, set it to a cone field, and in this cone field, I want to put into my base, right? Even like into, we'll put it into the cube down there, and then let's just rotate this thing around and zero all that stuff out. All right, so we've got this cone in here. Obviously, it's not the right angle, so what we can do is our direction, we'll find the right one, which is not that. Let's do Z minus. There we go. So we've got the right direction, pointing the right way. It's way too big right now. So let's decrease the height, decrease the width, and we can actually increase the height a bit, increase our radius a bit. And now if we were to play this, that vertex map is animating based on this light. And just to kind of show the exaggeration on that, if we put that down a bit, you can see this thing moving around now like that. So let's use this to drive our Voronoi fracture. We can't have it drive the Voronoi fracture directly, right? We can't plug a vertex map into there. But what we can do on the Voronoi fracture is create some effectors in there. So I'm going to go to MoGraph effector. Let's use a plane effector first, and I like to just kind of bring this stuff down to where it's being used. And we'll turn on the Voronoi. So my plane effector, by default, you'll see it's moved everything around. And by default, it's set to Y is at 100. Let's put that back to 0 because we don't need that. But if we start to play with this a little bit, you can see the whole thing moving. We don't want that either. What I want is scale. We'll do uniform scale. We can kind of scale everything up or scale everything down. You know, I think we want to scale everything down like that. And then for fall off, what we can do in here is we want our fall off to be based on that vertex. So you come in here, drag your vertex map in there. And now you can see what's happening. And let's just exaggerate this a little bit more. Right now, what's happening is where our cone or our light is projecting, that is driving where this falls off. And we actually want this to be inverted. So let's go back into our plane effector, fall off. Here we can just put an invert on there, right? Invert. There we go. So now anything that's not within the light is smaller. Now this probably won't play back in anything close to real time, but you can see as it goes through. Let's go to the last frame, and that should pop up. Oh, maybe I broke it. Here we go. You can see now it's this side of the face, but we still have the back. And the reason why we have the back is just because this cone is so big, it's actually painting through the object. If we were to click on the head and the vertex, let's turn the Voronoi off. Right, you can see it's painting through the whole object. So we really just want the front of this. And for that is really simple. We'll just adjust the height. And we can move, even just move that back as well. And now when we've got something like this, we'll turn our Voronoi fracture back on. And now we need to adjust our vertex map a little bit so that the front is getting hit kind of 100% of the vertex map. So we could move our cone. And if we did that, that would update it so we're getting more. The other thing we could do on here is just add a range map, and we could increase the max output. Right, so now if we look at this, the front of our head is full, and then the back is falling away. And I think as I'm playing with this, maybe this radius, we increase that a little bit, just to get a little bit more on the body itself. There we go. Yeah, all right. I think something like this is kind of cool. The other thing we want to do, right, because that's a little too even. I think we can kind of do the same thing with a random effector. So here we go, MoGraph effector, random effector, and again it's going to do this kind of crazy thing. But in the fall off, we could go in here and just copy these and throw that into our random effector. There we go. And let's adjust some of these parameters a little bit, because that's too crazy for what we're doing. So we'll just go down like that. And so now where the light is not on it, right, we're getting kind of broken up in a way that I think looks pretty cool. The other final thing we could do is in our Voronoi, we can increase this if we want. Let's go 500 and see how tiny we can get those little pieces without killing the whole project. So let's hit render on this and see what that looks like. So let's open up our render view. We'll hit render, and nothing is showing up, and that's because we don't have any lights turned on. So let's turn our lights on, and there we go. We've got this guy's head broken up based on where that light is. Last thing to do with all of this is talk quickly about tokens. The way tokens works, you have these little tags, right? So this right here is a token, this $PRJ. And what that is going to do, if you click this drop down here, you have all these different tokens here. PRJ was project name. So that right now is going to name my file named after this project name, which is hologram head clean version 1. If I do a backslash and then I do something else like my take, now that's going to create a folder with my project name and then name my file after the take. But what I like to do is make another one and do my take underscore my project, project name. And what this is going to do now is I have a folder that'll be hologram head clean version 1, a take which would say extras, RGB lights, head, whatever, And then my file name will be extras underscore hologram head clean version 01. And that way I don't have to make any folders. I don't have to do anything beyond creating this setup here. So if I were to save this up 15 times and make 30 different takes, all of that will just get created for me, and I no longer have to worry about making sure that my output name matches my project name, or that my take name matches what it was when I rendered it. It's all set up for me already to just create all of that, which is great from an organizational standpoint. And there are a lot of different options with this. If you drop this down, you can name files based on your camera, the frame range, the passes, all sorts of stuff. So the last thing we want to do before we hit render is just set up our takes real quick to be rendered. So right next to our takes names, we have this little option here. We can check that on. And what this is going to do is mark that take. And so now we can set this up to mark just the takes that we want, or we could have it mark all the takes. So that's a nice little feature, and we'll look at that in a second. Next to that is the camera. Right now it's set to inherit from parent, but if you had 5 different cameras, you could set up 5 different takes and tell each one of these to render from a different camera, which is great. And same thing with the render settings, inherent from parent. So whatever my main is set to, that's what the render settings will be. That's what the camera will be. But you can make a bunch of different render settings and have each take also render a different render setting. So I'm going to check all of these on, not my main, because I don't want that one. I've set up all these takes. And if I go down here, render all takes to picture viewer, or render marked takes to picture viewer. I'm going to do render marked takes to picture viewer. The other thing you could do if you didn't want to use your picture viewer is you can send this to the render queue. So if you go to render, then render queue. If I go to file, I have open with all takes, open with marked takes, add project with all takes, add project with marked takes. I'm going to do add project with marked takes because I already have this project open. It's going to ask if I want to save. Yes, I want to save. And now you'll see in my render queue, each take is set up in the render queue, so I can render all this and continue working or do whatever I want to do. So let's hit render and we'll hop into After Effects. So this is my final comp, and I promise you this was all done with just those 3 simple passes. It's that extras pass that has our gradient, it's got our RGB lights, and that's pretty much it. And there's no plugins that I'm using in this that are third party, so everything is just native to After Effects. So let's dig into this a little bit. I'll show you kind of some of the effects that I'm using. So this pre-comp in here is kind of the base of everything. We have the head, and I'm just masking out the eyes and the mouth because while this is a face, we don't want to lose certain details, right? The eyes are very important. The mouth, again, is very important to kind of get that character across. So that's why I'm just masking that out. And then we have the head, which has this interesting kind of fall off to it. Right? It's not just a normal mask. You could just mask that out, but it wouldn't look quite like this. So we have this kind of fall off that grows and evolves, and that's being built really with this RGB pass. We'll just turn that off. Right, it's our RGB pass. We're using shift channels just to pull out the red channel. Right, that was our light that was shining from our camera or our projector. Adjusting the levels a little bit just to cut out some more of the back. Then adding fractal noise to that. Without that, you get a very smooth fall off. Once we add that fractal noise, now it starts to break it up a little bit. And then the thing that's getting us the bulk of that look is our CC vector blur. And if you've never used CC vector blur, it's really fun to play with. There's a lot of stuff you can do. I've used this before to create sort of smoky looks using fractal noise. You can create kind of glassy, caustic looks. It's really, really interesting, and there's a lot of fun settings in here. So, I recommend playing with this if you get the chance. You can also plug in different vector maps, so it's based on something. If I plug in, let's say, the RGB cloud, it's using that cloud at the bottom to blur this. So there's really, Really fun stuff you can do with that. But then using that as a Luma matte on the head to get this look. And then in addition to that, just edges on the side here. What I'm doing here is really simple, just a layer style in there. And the reason why the layer style is pre-comped is because if you use layer styles, any effect that you do on top of that happens before the layer styles. Layer styles will try and do it. We'll do the layer styles after all of your effects. So for instance, if I put a fast blur on here, right, it's doing the stroke to the blur. It's not blurring the stroke. So if you do your layer styles, pre-comp it, and then you can affect that in any way you want. So that is just simply this edge here. It's getting filled, and then a few versions of that. These right now don't look like they're doing anything, but once they all get added on top, there's various blurs and echo, which is a fun effect, and that is giving us essentially just these kind of trails that happen. The other cool thing it's doing is that as these pieces move together and the lines disappear, you get an echo of where the lines were. So it feels like there's sort of a heat that's getting burnt into the hologram a little bit. Something that's the most fun on this is this RGB sparkly cloud. And let's just RAM preview this real quick and we can kind of see what this is doing. So this part's a little heavy, so we'll just call the RAM preview here and play this, but you can see what's happening is we've got this cool rainbowy cloud with some sparkles in it, some highlights in it. Feels like there's a lot of depth in there. And again, this is all just coming from this RGB layer. So let's look how this thing is getting made. Our base layer is just this RGB layer. Again, it's levels a fractal noise to break it up a little bit. I think this levels actually isn't doing anything, so I don't know why it's there. And a vector blur. And that is the base of this thing. And then from there, something I thought could be kind of cool is just adding a bit of depth to this. So you have these highlights that move through this. So it's not just this flat kind of vector blur layer. And that layer is two things. So we don't need these. But the base of it, let's turn off the Luma matte, is the same thing as the one below it. But I'm using the hue saturation, and that is just flipping the colors to about 85 degrees. If we went 180 and we added this on top, they would just be white because it would be kind of the inverse of the other colors. This guy here, which seems like this crazy stack of things, starts with the same levels, fractal noise, vector blur. Hue saturation is flipping it to that 85 degrees, doing find edges on there, which I think is an underrated effect when used properly, because now we get these cool sort of rainbow edges. I'm then doing a solid composite on here. And I'm doing that because if I just do a fractal noise, you'll see I get all these weird edges because those are some of the areas that there's still alpha on there. But if I do solid composite, and now I do the fractal noise, it all looks a lot better. And then blur that just a little bit and use that as a Luma matte to add on top of there. And so now we have those highlights. Then on top of that, another basically find edges, but some of the settings are tweaked a little bit so that they don't line up perfectly. So now you have these two layers, right? One is sort of a softer layer, and then one is a little sharper and brighter. And then we've got these sparkles. This, again, looks very complicated, but it's not. It's really just duplicates of the same thing with slightly different settings. So let's look at this. We've got the base is, again, our RGB light layer, but this time we're animating the hue with the fractal noise, some levels, and that way the colors shift. So imagine if these are sparkles, they're picking up different lights, they're reflecting differently, the colors are shifting. And the way we're getting the sparkles is using our extras pass. And the plan originally for this was to just use the cell pattern, but I wanted it to be a lot smaller. So I just remade a cell pattern in After Effects. Again, it doesn't match perfectly, but it's enough for what we need. Levels are crunching it so that we have these little sparkle shapes. The fractal noise is breaking that up even more. And then this levels is just clipping our values. If these values get too crazy, and I'll show you if that's set to off and off, if this were to add on top here, you can see all the black little specks. And because this project is in 32-bit, the blending modes don't work the way you would sort of anticipate them to work if you're in 8-bit or 16-bit color. When on one of these sort of crunched all the levels, that brought the black all the way down essentially into negative values. When we add that on top, we're adding this negative value on top of our positive value. And if that value is greater, it starts to become a negative value. So if I were to hover over some of these here, if you look at my values here, you'll see that that gets into negative. Let's try and find it. All right, that gets into negative, which is why we see the black. So all I have to do is just clip those, just throw levels on top, clip it, starts to work the way you'd expect it to work. And now we have a sparkle, and it's just duplicating that several times with slightly different settings to build this sense of depth, right? We have different colors now, we have different sizes, different brightness. And when we go back to here, we have two different versions of this. So this one has a compound blur. Compound blur is great because it's like essentially a simple blur, but you can plug a blur layer into it. So if you didn't want to use camera depth or camera lens blur to use a depth matte, you can use a compound blur. You don't have nearly as many settings. It's a little simpler, but you can plug in a blur layer. So for this blur layer, I'm using the RGB because I want that evolution and for the blur to change. So you'll see up here, it's more blurry. Down there, it's a little sharper. What that gives us is this, again, this depth. The sharper ones appear closer to the surface. The blurrier ones appear to fall back a little bit. And this second layer is just to boost that up a little bit. And then you end up with something like this. I would hope that this doesn't feel like your more traditional holograms, right? I feel like it's something kind of unique when we're looking at holograms. It's very colorful, it's very, very sparkly. It has a sense of depth to it. So let's move on. So that's our RGB cloud. That's the head, right? But there's more going on to this. We also have these layers. This is kind of our base for everything. So let's go here. What are we doing in this one? We have this scan comp. Now the scan comp is using mostly that extras pass that we made. Now this scan comp is using mostly that extras pass that we had, right? The one that had the gradient and the cells and the Fresnel and all that fun stuff. And the base of it is really built off of this effect right here, this scanning effect. And this is an effect that I love to use. I've been doing it for a very, very long time on a variety of things. You can use it. You can use it for a lot of stuff. So let's talk really quickly how we make this scan. You see right now, 3 layers: shift channels, levels, colorama. That is it. So shift channels, basically just shifting into the red channel, which has our gradient in there. Levels is just kind of crunching that gradient a little bit. And then colorama is really where kind of all of this, magic is happening. So let me turn that off. I'll make a new colorama so we can just look at this real quickly. So colorama basically just remaps your color values. And I think this is really clearly evident in this. We just have a black to white ramp in there. Right, see that? And also, let me adjust that. There we go. We have this black to white ramp And we're remapping the values to this sort of hue cycle here. So on top is our black and white. White goes to the right, black goes to the left. So you kind of work your way all the way back around. This will get a little easier to see if we go to ramp gray. And sorry, I said that backwards. White goes to the left, black goes to the right. You can see now nothing's really being remapped, but if I were to go in here and let's say add, I don't know, a blue, now I've got a little bit of blue that goes back there. And if I were to go here and add some red, well, now I've got some red there. So that's essentially what Colorama is doing. It's kind of the equivalent of Photoshop's gradient map adjustment layer. So once we have our ramp gray, we want this to feel more like a scan, right? We don't want this full range of color. So what we want is something more like this, right? Where we just have a band in there. But right now we can't see anything. So the other part of this effect that we'll do is the phase shift. And what that's doing is taking, imagine this black and white ramp and just kind of shifting it over to the left or the right. So now your white value is, you know, where your blacks were. And if we kind of cycle this around, you can start to see that change. Right, so all we have to do to get this scanning effect essentially is to animate the phase shift. And we'll do that with just a simple expression, time times 100. Let's play that. There you go. The rest of this, this pre-comp is all based on this effect. So let's delete this new one that we made. Let's go back to our old one. We'll set this back down to 50. And let's look at the next layer. Our next layer is that cell layer, right? So it's just the shift channels using green, adjusting the levels to do that. And then that's being lumimatted by that same scanning effect. So now what we have is what feels like as this thing scans, it leaves behind this kind of cell pattern trail behind it. And then on top of that, we've got this guy. All this one is doing is just cutting out the front face, just because without it, you get this big sort of pop of color in the beginning that feels kind of weird. So we do that, it just eases into that a little bit more. And then finally, we have the head comp that we were using before, but this has, again, find edges on it, and then desaturating it, just so we get something that feels like we're pulling the outlines of this face. And then you add all that stuff together, and it looks like this. And then from there, on this layer, or this comp, right, we have that head that's been pre-comped. And then again, we're using vector blur, but this time the vector blur is being driven by the RGB pass, and that's just this guy, right? So it's being driven by the lightness values here. And then that face, right, we're cutting out the front of it again, like we said we were going to do with the with our extras pass, right? We're using this extras pass here, adjusting the levels to really just pull out the front of it so the rest of it kind of falls off. And that way we just get a clean render on top of our blur, right? Because we don't want to lose the face. We want to make everything that's not the face kind of fall off into the background. And then that is pre-comped again and brought in here where we are doing this chromatic aberration. And I think this is really cool, really simple effect to do without any fancy plugins. Just duplicate your comp 3 times, use our buddy shift channels, and from the first one, take the red channel, the next one, take just the green channel, and then the last one, take the blue channel. And when you add them all together, you get what looks like your final render. And if I were to take off this lens effect, you'll see what I'm talking about. Right, just looks like our final render. But on each one of these, we have this lens effect that is stretching the edges of our render at different values. And then we're also putting a wiggle expression on the center of it. So things start moving around and shifting and giving it that bit of energy. And finally, we have this color correct layer here. On this, we have a radial blur, and all this is doing is just kind of blurring the edges as we get close to the edge of the frame, and it kind of makes everything blend in a little nicer there. Followed by Magic Bullet Renoiser, and that's just to add a bit of grain to this, because it's always nice to have a little bit of texture when you're working with this stuff. And finally, we have Magic Bullet Looks, and what that is doing is giving us just our final little bit of color correct. You can see the difference that we have there. Magic Bullet Looks, I'm sure everyone is familiar with it at this point, but if you are not, it's this incredibly powerful plugin for color correction. They have all these built-in preset looks. I'm using one of these. Honestly, I don't remember which one it is at this point, but you can go in once you have it picked and then change all your values. You can tweak it and adjust it to your liking, but even if you never touched any of this stuff and just use these looks, I think it's pretty powerful. I know now that this is built into Redshift, so you can get it straight out of your renders. But, you know, like I was saying before, I like to do all my stuff in post and have as much control as I can in post, so I wouldn't want to bake this into any renders. That's it. That's how we get this this cool, crazy look, all from just a few really simple layers out of After Effects. I think if I tried to get this look straight out of Redshift, I don't know if I'd be able to do it. I think me personally would not be able to do it. Maybe there's someone out there who could, but that's why, you know, I like to get kind of the bare minimum out of Cinema and try and make my look entirely in composite. So hopefully that was interesting, somewhat educational, and I talked about things that people don't really use too often. But thank you for listening and spending your time with me. And I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.